How did I come about to write a book like this, for heaven's sakes? For me, it all started in the 6th grade, believe it or not. At that time, I realized I didn't believe everything my teacher was telling me. And from then on, I always questioned my authorities. By the time I was in high school, I had come to the conclusion that the Supreme Court even was in error. But I had never met or read any libertarian work until I was about 33 years old. At that time, I met my first libertarian, and I was just excited to meet such a person. Well, it came about that a few years back, I was looking at a website, and lo and behold, Walter Block was advertising for a co-author who was a scientist or an engineer. Well, I'm an engineer, and I'm an anarcho-capitalist, and I thought, well, this is me. And so we were off and writing. So I want to start off by reading a little section here. This is the dedication for the book, and it's really what the book is about. Prior to the writing of histories, from before the dawn of civilization, the homers of the earth braved the elements to reach new vistas. This book is dedicated to the maniacal mariners who have revolutionized society in ways that the petrified toe dippers of the world never believed possible. May ensuing adventurers continue that quest for excellence. That's what the book is about. It's nominally about water, but what it's really about is people taking care of themselves. If you're a fisherman, and what are you going to do about overfishing? Are you going to complain that, oh, the Japanese are out there taking too many fish? Or are you going to do something about it? This book is about doing something about it. We, Walter and I, have the view that all bodies of water, oceans, rivers, lakes, and aquifers should be privately owned. We go into how that's going to be accomplished, but mainly, why do we want to accomplish it? And the reason we want to accomplish it is because we believe it is moral and practical for private companies to own, or private individuals or companies to own water. In other words, the ocean right now is a commons. Why is there overfishing? It's because nobody owns the fish. The law of the United Nations on maritime law says that this is the common good, that everybody has a right to it. So we ask, well, how does a person in northern Pakistan have any rights to the water? He's never even seen the ocean. How does a person in Iowa, likewise, have any rights to the ocean? He may have never seen the ocean. We base our ownership on the idea of you'll have to excuse me, sometimes I get mental blocks. Homesteading. So we talk about, we have a whole chapter on Lockean homesteading principles that basically the way you come to own an ocean is you start to use it. Now you're probably not going to own the ocean, but you're going to own some aspect of that. For example, I mentioned fishermen. If you were a fisherman, you might come to own a school of fish. The advantage of that is then that you're going to husband that fish, that school of fish. You're going to make sure that it is not overutilized. You're going to collect profits from that school of fish, and therefore it's going to be in your interest to make sure that that school of fish survives. We go on and we talk about rivers. We're of the view that first in use is first in right. In other words, the first person to utilize the river is the person who has some kind of ownership in it. Again, it may not be entire ownership of the whole river, or it might be that too. But what it is, say for example, you're a farmer and you divert water from the river and start irrigating your farm. You then develop the right by use of that. The guy coming along later that says, no, that's my water. He has no say in it because he was not the homesteader. If he wants it, he can buy it. The same thing applies to the same thing applies to any other use. One use that we talk about a lot is transportation. In fact, this was one of the earliest uses of rivers, was for transportation. People would go up and down the river in boats. If you're the first person to put a river to use for transportation, then you have the right to do that. But that's not necessarily an exclusive right. Let's go back to the farmer. If the farmer takes water and irrigates the field, that's not inhibiting your using the river for transportation. Likewise, using the river for transportation is not inhibiting the farmer's thing. The only thing is, though, that the first and right means he gets it. If the farmer comes first, then he gets the water that he has claimed. If the transportation company says, wait a minute, that's taking too much water and there's not enough depth left in the river for our boats, too bad. It's the farmers. And that works the other way around. If the transportation guy came first and he needs a certain depth in his river, then the farmer cannot take that water that would inhibit the transportation that way. We go on and we talk about lakes. I won't talk too much about lakes. That's probably the least interesting area, partly because it's so much like the ocean in the way that it's just a big container of water. But we do talk about aquifers. Aquifers are fairly difficult to talk about because nobody sees the water. Where is it? It's underground someplace. You can dig a well and you can, excuse me. When they were trying to talk me into doing this, one of the things that I used to resist that was the fact that my voice dries out. Sorry about that. Anyway, moving on. The thing with aquifers is that you can find the water by drilling a well, and indeed that's been done for a long time. Thousands of years, people have been drilling or digging, and some of them are quite deep. I traveled at one point to Israel and looked at a lot of ancient sites and found wells that were hundreds of feet deep. They'd been dug in rock by hand. Amazing. But it's been done for a long time. But who has the right to that water? Well, if you dig a well and you start using the water you do. However, once again, you have to be aware of other uses that were claimed prior. In other words, when you start taking water out of the ground, you might be taking it out of the river. If you take water out of the river, you might be taking it out of the ground. Indirectly, but they're not unrelated. And that's where the engineering came in to this book, because I was able to talk about these relationships. We talk about artesian water, for example. Artesian water is really very simple. It's no different from any other water, except for one thing. It's groundwater, and it's water that comes out automatically without being pumped. You dig a hole, and the water starts squirting out. In other words, the groundwater is under pressure. So, if you have, say, for example, a brewery that has artesian water and they advertise for that, and somebody else comes along and digs a well and they start taking water out, and the effect of that is to lower the pressure in the aquifer. The artesian water goes away. They have stolen water from that brewery. We side with the brewery in that case because they were there first in the example we used. We talk about piracy. Why would we talk about piracy? Because there are, in fact, thieves in the world. We don't approve of them. And we would regard the most prominent thieves as being those in places like Washington, D.C. and whatnot. But nevertheless, they exist. How do we deal with them? And we deal with them basically by saying, it's up to you to defend yourself. So we go through, okay, well, you can have navies, and we talk about navies and why those aren't such good things, unless it's a privately owned navy. If that's the way you choose to defend yourself, that's fine. But for a government to come in and impose that, say, we're building a navy and we're taking the money from you to build it, and that's where Riparian comes in. We talk about privateers. We kind of like privateers in a lot of ways. In fact, one of my relatives happened to be a privateer during the Revolutionary War. But the problem with privateers is they're still connected to the government. Okay, privateers are private companies, yes, but they're under contract. So my great-great-great-great-grandfather was a privateer who had a commission from the state of Massachusetts to prey on English shipping. There's a couple of problems with that. Number one is he's commissioned by a state government. It wasn't a group of private citizens that hired him. It was a government. There was no, in his contract, there was no provision for the difference between a state-owned vessel and a private English merchantman who might have opposed the war all along. I mean, he might be on his side, and yet he has permission to prey on it. So we don't exactly go there, but where we do end up is that the owner of a vessel who's going to go on the high seas where he might be at risk, it's his responsibility to either arm his vessel and train his crew to protect themselves, or to hire a what would basically be a privateer, just not a privateer for the company, but a person who would have a military type vessel who would hire himself out, a mercenary in effect. We go on to have a debate, Walter and I think the debate is the best chapter in the book, actually. That's my opinion. But how this revolves around the mechanics of having private ownership of water. And exactly how do you accomplish private ownership of water? Well, there's several ways. The most traditional way is what's called riparian rights, and we poo-poo that right. But basically, riparian rights says if you own a piece of property right next to the river, your property line extends to the center of the river, a lot like an old style road where the road was built along the property line. But your ownership went to the center of the road, but everybody had the right to use the road. And this was done by common law. It just evolved over time. The problem with riparian rights, though, and the reason why we poo-pooed the idea, is that if you can take water from the river, water seeks a level water surface. So if I take water, then water flows into the area where I took it from. And if I take more water, it continues to flow in. And I can basically, if I can figure out what to do with the water, I can basically pump the river dry. And so I'm stealing water from my neighbors. Now, as it exists, riparian rights is the most common among the states, but because of that, it's always regulated. Well, we all know what the problems with regulations are, so we don't like to go there. So, another way, excuse me, that's my fault.
Bad boy, bad boy.
Oops. I can't believe that. But anyway, my phone never rings except when I'm speaking. So one way is to own the whole river in toto. You just own the whole thing. And then, but it doesn't have to be a single person, or it could be, but it doesn't have to be. For example, if there's a bunch of farmers in cities and industries all using river water, they can have shares in a corporation that owns the river. That would be one way. Another way is what we call prior appropriation. In other words, the first person there, like I illustrated before with the farmer and the transportation company, the first person there starts to use the water, but he uses what he uses, and that's what he owns. The second person comes along, and he owns what comes next, what he takes. However, if those are in conflict, the guy who is there first prevails. But a river like the South Platte might have hundreds of owners. So in a drought, like we were going through a few years back, a lot of those owners don't get any water. Well, they can solve that with what's called augmentation plan, which basically means you have storage. So on the wet years, you take water and you put it in your storage. In the dry years, you release it from your storage and put it to your use. This is done all the time. And so these are the two ways that we latch on as methods to do that. We then go, and I'm probably running out of time here, but we go in to explain how this procedure of either in toto ownership or prior appropriation ownership can be related to all the bodies of water, oceans, rivers, lakes, and aquifers.